Hello, YouTube family. Thanks for joining me on this episode. Please, if you like these videos, hit the like button. Please subscribe, and always feel free to ring the bell for notifications. This episode, as you can tell by the graphic to my left, is about gun control regarding the recent mass shootings. Gun control again is in the air. So you have people discussing gun control, you have right-wing people trying to do everything they can to avoid discussions of gun control, legitimate ones. The right-wing typically has this habit of the throw 1,000 things against the wall and see what sticks kind of approach to verbally combating gun control. As far as the legislation that's been proposed by the Democrats in the House, they have two separate bills. One of the bills passed with 10 Republicans supporting it, one passed with only 2 Republicans supporting it. So it was mostly along party lines, although there is some Republican support for the gun control legislation that was passed in the House. What the legislation does: it expands background checks to include weapons purchased over the internet, weapons purchased at gun shows and through certain private party transactions. It gives authorities 10 days to complete background checks before a gun sale can be licensed. Currently, gun sales can proceed if the government cannot complete complicated background checks within the allotted 3 days. So in the current situation, if you have a time where there are a lot of people purchasing guns, a lot of background checks being put through the system, in some cases, the 3 days they're allotted, they can't do that within that time, so the purchase just goes through without the background check at all. And that's at a gun shop. It's the Wild West as far as gun shows go. And I wanted to play this clip of Senator John Kennedy on Fox News.
We gave you a lot of information. There's still a lot we don't know, but one thing is predictable: the gun debate is back.
Well, Brian, look, these killings were terrible. They were horrible. I'm reminded, though, that America is a big country. We're free. And one of the prices we pay for that freedom is that you're always going to have some people who abuse it. Freedom is risk. What we've got to concentrate on is how to control that risk. You're not going to stop the killings until you stop the killers. But you don't stop drunk drivers by getting rid of all sober drivers, which is what many of my Democratic friends want to do with respect to the Second Amendment. In my judgment, we do not need more gun control. We need more idiot control.
And that's Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana. No relation, as far as I know, to the former President John Kennedy. He's from Louisiana. This senator, the Kennedy family, the famous Kennedy family, is from Massachusetts. And in the Kennedy clip, the host, I think his name is Kilmeade, says the gun debate is back to set it up for Kennedy, who says these killings were terrible. No shit, Sherlock. He also says America is a big country. Has nothing to do with the discussion. We're free. One of the prices we pay for that freedom is that you're going to always have some people that will abuse it. So there, basically, Senator John Kennedy is saying mass shootings are just a price we have to pay for being America. That's the price we have to pay for having freedom in this country. Freedom is a risk. What we have to concentrate on is how to control that risk, is one of Kennedy's statements, Which, yes, one of the ways to control that risk is gun control regulation. You're not going to stop the killing until you stop the killers. Yes, again, gun control legislation. These two recent mass killings that have got the gun control debate going again, in both instances, the killers purchased their firearms within 1 week of the incident. And then he goes on to say, you don't stop drunk drivers by getting rid of all sober drivers, which is what many of my Democrat friends want to do with regard to the Second Amendment. And this is, on its face, an absurd comparison. This is at least the second, possibly the third time since these mass shootings that Senator Kennedy has compared the gun debate to driving. And that is where he's trying to discuss something that's completely out of bounds for the discussion. Also, he says, Democrats, the comparison of you don't stop drunk drivers by getting rid of all sober drivers, he's saying that's what many of my Democrat friends want to do with regard to the Second Amendment, which is absurd and not true. As I just went over the elements in their legislation, there is no banning of guns. There's no banning of any type of guns. There's no banning of any type of ammo. There's no banning of any of everything that's legal today. If that legislation passed tomorrow, those things would still be legal tomorrow. It's not stopping anyone from legally being able to own a gun unless they can't pass a background check. But going on that absurd thing that John Kennedy said, I would say let's do this. Let's regulate guns the same way we regulate cars. Let's do it. I'll agree with the Republicans. Let's regulate guns the same way we regulate cars, because we regulate the hell out of cars. We regulate the hell out of highways. So, if we regulated guns the same as we regulate cars, when you want to drive a car, you have to do, in most states, driver's training. So let's do that. Let's add that to it. In order to own a gun, you have to go through firearms training. And that also will create jobs. Look at that. I'm not even a billionaire, and I'm a job creator. You would have firearms training sites popping up state by state, so people could go get their training so they could eventually end up owning a gun. Let's have firearms training required. You have to take a mandatory certain amount of hours of firearms training with a recognized trainer. Let's do that. In order to get a driver's license, you have to take a written knowledge test. Let's add that to it. In order to own a firearm, before you can purchase it, you have to have training. You have to take a written knowledge test. You have to take a written test over firearms. And then, to get a driver's license, you have to have the hands-on test, where you actually get in the car and drive. Let's add that to it. In order to buy a gun now, you have to have firearms training, a written test. You have to have a hands-on test, where you actually show that you can load, unload, clean, and properly handle and fire a firearm at a firing range in front of a trainer. You have to be licensed to drive a car. All that stuff's going into the licensing. And there are fees involved all along the way. You'll have to pay for the training. You'll have to pay for the written test. You'll have to pay for the hands-on test. And you will have to pay for the gun license you end up with in your hand. And so once you complete that, in order to buy a car, you also have to have insurance on the car. So let's add that to it. In order to buy a gun in America now, you have to have firearms training. You have to take a written test, a hands-on test. You have to get a firearms license. And then you have to purchase insurance as a gun owner. And the insurance companies Who knows what they're going to charge, but it won't become cheap, I'm guessing. Because if you happen to have a screw go loose in your head and you go crazy with your firearm, the lawsuits that can come back on that insurance company are going to be insane. But if you want to start talking in terms of cars with the gun debate, Senator Kennedy, let's do it. You have to have insurance as a gun owner. You have to have firearm owner insurance. You have to register your car, so let's say you got to register your gun. Every state's got to keep a registration of all the gun owners. You buy a gun, it has to be registered. If you sell the gun, you have to make sure that the person you're selling it to has completed the training, the written test, the hands-on test, has a firearms license, has insurance, gun owner insurance, and then you can change the registration over from for that person that you're selling the gun to. Simple. So simple. And this completely makes sense to me. Let's do it. Senator Kennedy, you want to be ridiculous and talk about cars in a gun control debate? Let's start regulating guns the way we regulate cars. Because right now, you can buy a gun, then you can decide you want to sell that gun. You can sell it to somebody, and then they can take the gun and go kill somebody, and then somebody comes back on you to say what's going on. You're like, oh, I sold the gun to somebody else. I don't know. That's one of the issues you have in this country. There are people who are not allowed to buy firearms, such as convicted felons, who will have a friend or family member buy a gun for them. And then if people go back to that person, oh, I sold it, or it was stolen. Oh, yeah, I bought that gun, but it was stolen. So easy. There's no penalty right now for any of that stuff. It is literally the Wild West as far as gun ownership goes. As far as buying a gun and owning a gun, it's so simple. Now let's get into the details. You're paying all this money. You have to pay for the registration. I mean, like, your driver's license has to be renewed every, 10 years? So let's say for a firearms license, it has to be renewed every 5 years, every 10 years, whatever. So you got to pay to renew that every 5, 10 years. The registration on the gun. Registrations for vehicles, it differs state to state. The state I live in, Nevada, when you register a vehicle, your registration tax is based on the purchase price of the car. So if you have a very expensive car, your registration's pricey. If you have a rather cheap car, it's not so much. So, someone here in Nevada that finds a great deal on a Ferrari, and they say, hey, this older lady was selling a Ferrari. Her husband passed away. He had the Ferrari. She didn't want it. I bought it for $50,000. It originally sold for over $230,000. I got a great deal. The problem is when you go register it, your registration is based on the $230,000 plus dollars in Nevada. And so, although it may seem like a good deal when you buy it, it's pricey as heck when you go register it. But let's talk about that with guns. If you decide you want to buy a handgun for your self-protection at home, plenty of people do that. Fine. You buy a handgun. Let's say that the registration is based on the purchase price of the gun. I don't really know what the average handgun costs in America, but let's say a handgun on average costs $400. And let's say 10% is what you pay. 10% of the purchase price is what you pay for registration every year. So you buy a handgun every year, you got to pay $40 to re-register it. No big deal. A shotgun, let's say a shotgun's on average $500 purchase price. 10% $50. So every year you pay $50 to re-register your shotgun. If you buy a rifle, let's say the average cost of a rifle is $600. 10% of that, $60. So if you buy a rifle, every year you have to pay $60 to re-register it. Not a staggering amount of money. Then you get to the people that have 20 guns, 50 guns, 150 guns, 300 guns. Then it becomes cumbersome when you have these folks that have an insane amount of firearms that they've got to pay to register every year. 40, 50, and 60, it's going to average out to $50. If you're averaging paying $50 per gun for 300 guns, you're talking about $1,500 per year you're having to pay for registration. There's a reason why things are set up that way. There's a reason why you have the red tape and the costs involved. It's the same thing with cars. It's the same thing with adoption. When I was in the Army, there was a young female soldier complaining to me about how expensive it was to adopt children in America. She and her husband had been looking to adopt a child. They wanted to adopt a child, but there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of time, and a lot of cost involved. The reason for that is because regulations put in place to make sure people don't go into it lightly. They want to make sure you don't have it so inexpensive that people decide on a whim that irresponsible people, or say irresponsible young people, don't go in on a whim and say, I want a cute cuddly kid, let's go buy a kid, they're only $50. You have that process in place because if you're going to adopt a kid, one, there's the cost and there's the time involved to get through the process. The upfront cost is to make sure that you want that. The time involved gives you time to decide, now that we've been going through the process and I've thought about it, I don't know that I really want a kid. I don't know if I want that responsibility right now. There's a reason for that. There's a reason that's involved. There's a reason why it would be good if that kind of thing was involved with guns. People talk about having their guns taken away. There is no politician in this country's history that has tried to take your guns away. They've not suggested it. They've not proposed legislation. Never has a damn politician tried to take your damn guns away. Stop whining about it. Period. Putting regulations on gun owners to try and make sure if we have gun owners that they're responsible gun owners is what a responsible civilization does. Period. And we do it in a lot of different facets. For some reason, we're just idiots and don't do it with regard to guns in this country. You don't have the unlimited right to own firearms. If you did, you could own a tank. You could own a F-35 jet. You could own a cruise missile. We've decided we don't allow that. So we have made the decision that you can own guns, you can own weapons, but you can't own any kind of weapon. There are limits. There need to be limits set. We do need to have limits, and we need to enforce limits. And all this stuff I'm talking about was busting on John Kennedy because he's a moron. But it's true. I mean, all this stuff. Running guns the way we do with cars. We could have all that in place. Require training. Makes sense. Damn, it makes sense. I was in the Army. I had to go through training for guns for everything that I fired. You have to have a knowledge test, a written test, practical test. You have to get licensed. If you buy a gun, you have to get it registered. And if you sell the gun, you have to make sure that the person you sold it to has followed all these things as well, and that they have a license. And then you switch the registration over to them. And that way, one of the things that will solve is some of the criminals getting their hands on guns. Because some of the criminals, the way they get their hands on guns is, like I said, they have a friend or family buy the gun for them because they can't legally do it because they have a felony on their record. But even this common sense stuff, Republicans argue against it. And they're not arguing from a position of truth. They're deceptive about it. They're lying about it. What Kennedy was saying about Democrats. Saying they're trying to take guns away from lawful gun owners so that the unlawful gun owners don't have it. BS. I just read what was in the legislation. It's expanding background checks. It's expanding checks. It's giving the government more time to complete a check so that, they're not stuck with the 3 days. If they can't complete it within 3 days, you get the gun anyway. That's nonsense. And we need to be more responsible than that. If you are a parent, you want to make sure your kids are responsible. Why would you not want this country to be responsible with damn guns? Hell. And all that makes sense. It makes sense. And when politics are taken out of it, and it's just put in a question, it's overwhelming. Democrats, Republicans, independents all support expanding background checks. But then you get people like Fox News, you get Republicans going on Fox News and muddying the waters, talking about crap that isn't taking place. Nobody is trying to take your damn guns, baby. Nobody's trying to do it. So let's set a new trend for America. Let's not be smart, or not be stupid. Let's be smart. Kennedy, at the end of that clip, was saying we don't need gun control, we need idiot control. Okay, Mr. Kennedy, explain the baseline. What's the baseline for idiots? And what's the controls we're putting in place to control them? Explain that to me. He's making sound bites that are nonsensical. I mean, he has no answers. He just has an argument that gun control is bad in any form, which it is not. Gun control is very popular around the country. Once you take politics out of it, once you take the BS from Fox News, from politicians out of it, and that's what they're trying to fight against, because they want the NRA's donation money. If they ever supported gun control legislation, if a Republican supports gun control legislation, the NRA won't donate money to them, and they want the money. That's the bottom line. But we have no idiot control in this country, because you had one idiot talking to another idiot in the clip I just played. There's no control of those idiots. They go on TV, they muddy the waters to try and keep America from doing something intelligent. That's idiocy. Thanks for watching.